Welcome to the Daily Bite with your host, Pastor Steve Andrews. We continue building the tabernacle blueprint in Exodus chapter 26 today. Moreover, you shall make the tabernacle with 10 curtains of fine twined linen and blue and purple and scarlet yarns. You shall make them with cherubim skillfully worked into them. The length of each curtain shall be 28 cubits, and the breadth of each curtain 4 cubits. All the curtains shall be the same size. 5 curtains shall be coupled to one another, and the other 5 curtains shall be coupled to one another. And you shall make loops of blue on the edge of the outermost curtain in the first set. Likewise, you shall make loops on the edge of the outermost curtain in the second set. 50 loops you shall make on the one curtain, and 50 loops you shall make on the edge of the curtain that is in the second set. The loops shall be opposite one another, and you shall make 50 clasps of gold, and couple the curtains one to the other with the clasps, so that the tabernacle may be a single whole. You shall also make curtains of goat's hair for a tent over the tabernacle. 11 curtains shall you make. The length of each curtain shall be 30 cubits, and the breadth of each curtain 4 cubits. The 11 curtains shall be the same size. You shall couple 5 curtains by themselves, and 6 curtains by themselves, and the 6th curtain you shall double over at the front of the tent. You shall make 50 loops on the edge of the curtain that is outermost in one set, and 50 loops on the edge of the curtain that is outermost in the second set. You shall make 50 clasps of bronze, and put the clasps into the loops, and couple the tent together that it may be a single whole. And the part that remains of the curtains of the tent, the half curtain that remains, shall hang over the back of the tabernacle. And the extra that remains in the length of the curtains, the cubit on the one side and the cubit on the other side, shall hang over the sides of the tabernacle, on this side and that side, to cover it. And you shall make for the tent a covering of tanned ram skins, and a covering of goat skins on top. You shall make upright frames for the tabernacle of acacia wood. 10 cubits shall be the length of a frame, and a cubit and a half the breadth of each frame. There shall be 2 tenons in each frame, for fitting together. So shall you do for all the frames of the tabernacle. You shall make the frames for the tabernacle, 20 frames for the south side, and 40 bases of silver you shall make under the 20 frames. 2 bases under one frame for its 2 tenons, and 2 bases under the next frame for its 2 tenons. And for the second side of the tabernacle on the north side, 20 frames, and their 40 bases of silver. 2 bases under one frame, and 2 bases under the next frame. And for the rear of the tabernacle westward you shall make 6 frames. And you shall make 2 frames for corners of the tabernacle in the rear. They shall be separate beneath, but joined at the top at the first ring. Thus shall it be with both of them. They shall form the 2 corners. And there shall be 8 frames with their bases of silver, 16 bases, 2 bases under one frame, and 2 bases under another frame. You shall make bars of acacia wood, 5 for the frames of the one side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the frames of the other side of the tabernacle, and 5 bars for the frames of the side of the tabernacle at the rear westward. The middle bar, halfway up the frame, shall run from end to end. You shall overlay the frames with gold, and shall make their rings of gold for holders for the bars, and you shall overlay the bars with gold. Then you shall erect the tabernacle according to the plan for it that you were shown on the mountain. And you shall make a veil of blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen. It shall be made with cherubim skillfully worked into it, and you shall hang it on 4 pillars of acacia overlaid with gold, with hooks of gold, on 4 bases of silver. And you shall hang the veil from the clasps, and bring the ark of the testimony in there within the veil. And the veil shall separate for you the holy place from the most holy. You shall put the mercy seat on the ark of the testimony in the midst of the holy place, the most holy place. And you shall set the table outside the veil, and the lampstand on the south side of the tabernacle opposite the table. And you shall put the table on the north side. You shall make a screen for the entrance of the tent of blue and purple and scarlet yarns and fine twined linen embroidered with needlework. And you shall make for the screen 5 pillars of acacia and overlay them with gold. Their hooks shall be of gold, and you shall cast 5 bases of bronze for them. This is the word of the Lord. So in our text today, one thing that you can do as a family, again, if you're doing this already, measuring out things in your backyard perhaps, with a tape measure, you could measure out the size of the actual tent itself. This is going to come out to be, let's see, in verse 1, 10 curtains, and they're going to be 28 cubits, which is 42 feet, by 4 cubits, which is 6 feet. And those curtains are all going to end up getting strung together, attached to one another. So what you're really going to find as we try to measure out the dimensions of the tabernacle itself, you're looking really at to use cubits first, 30 cubits by 10 cubits by 10 cubits. So it's 10 cubits high, it's 10 cubits wide, and it's going to be 30 cubits in length. The most holy place will be 10 cubits itself. So essentially that most holy place is a cube in shape, and then the holy place, the first room that you would come into, is twice as long as that, 20 cubits. So again, to put cubits into inches or even feet today, the 30 cubit length, the full length of the tabernacle, is about 45 feet. And then the 10 cubit width and height is 15 feet. So this is a 15-foot tall structure, which is not quite as tall as a 2-story house, but your typical 8-foot ceiling, it's about 2 floors, would be the right size for height. And so you can measure that out. You can picture that with your kids. They could get pretty close if you've got a play set in the backyard, maybe, but measuring on a tree to show them would be another way to do that. And so the picture that we get with these curtains in the text is that, let's see. Let's look at the text a little bit more specifically. So these curtains in the first paragraph, these are interior curtains. They are going to run, so we talked about already, 42 feet by 6. So when you put them all together, they're 42 by 60. And so you've got this 42-foot curtain that's going to run over the whole top of this framework, which is described later in the chapter. So you've got first this interior curtain that we find, and then you're going to have an exterior curtain, which is described in the second paragraph very similarly, except a little bit longer. It comes out to be 30 cubits instead of 28 cubits when they make it, so 45 feet instead of 42. And then even beyond that, they're going to be making a third protective layer just out of tanned skins and things like that are going to cover and protect this tabernacle. And it also, some way, it's waterproofing, but it also may help it to look less attractive to thievery, theft. Because if you look inside this thing, it's exquisite. I mean, that's one of the things you can talk about in this chapter. What would it look like to go into this place where everything is made out of gold, and such beautiful cloth and material that's been put into work as well. You literally have angels worked into the embroidery of these curtains that are being created. So it's a beautiful sight to see and behold this holiness of God, certainly a part of the picture for us in the text. With that second set, there's going to be some overhanging. It's bigger than the first set, the interior curtain, for the purpose of protecting it. It is a cover that goes over the cover, a cover for the cover, and the second one has to be bigger, is the picture here. And then in verse 15, we get the measurements of each of the frames. And so we see those coming together. They're 10 cubits length, so 15 feet high. These are going to be vertical frames, but they're cubit and a half in breadth, so they're about 27 inches then in their width, as we would think of it. And so they're all then put together. You have acacia poles that you see starting in verse 26 that are going to go in between these. You have frames, bases for these frames that are made out of silver for them to attach to, so that this can have a solid structure underneath it. All of these things coming together. Verse 29, the frames are all overlaid with gold. And then you finally get, after all that's built, you get to verse 30, where they're finally going to get to erect the tabernacle. They're going to finally get to put it together. when they've reached this point, again, this is the blueprint. They're not actually there yet. They're not to this point in the conversation to be able to have that set up yet. Then you get the next paragraph starting in verse 31, and they're going to make this extra veil. This is going to go inside the tabernacle, inside the tent itself. And so what you have, again, it's made similarly to the interior curtain with the blue, purple, scarlet yarn, fine twined linen, and the cherubim skillfully worked into it. That's a repetition here. So it's going to look the same. But this veil is going to divide the interior of the tabernacle into those two rooms we were talking about before, the holy place, which is twice the size, and the most holy place. And only once a year, this is stuff we'll learn as we continue the book, only once a year can anyone go through that veil to the most holy place where the Ark of the Covenant, the throne of God himself, sits. That's the only thing in that room. That room houses God alone. And so this veil is important. It takes, as we're going to see that picture that the tabernacle is literally God enthroned in the midst of his people, this veil separates God's presence from his people, his holiness from their sin. Because as we talked about in the course of the book so far, we as sinners cannot come into the presence of holy God and live. Our sin deserves death, and if we approach God, that's what we would get. The exception to that is the life that he gives. So here God is going to lead his people from the very midst of his people, and he is erecting this curtain, this veil, to protect them from his holiness, from his perfection. He is working to save them and care for them, and this is one of those layers of care. Now, Jewish tradition, from what I've heard, holds that this veil ends up being 4 inches thick when they make the actual temple. And in the New Testament era, when Christ is crucified on the cross, Matthew chapter 27, we see that the curtain is torn in two from top to bottom, from God to man. As Jesus dies on the cross, he takes away all the sin of the world. He forgives all of it, everything ever committed, everything that would yet to be committed, the things that you and I have done in the years since. All of that sin is gone. And so now, as sinners who are no longer sinners before the Lord, we can come into his presence and not die. We can come before the holy Lord of heaven and earth and live. This temple curtain theology is such a beautiful thing that Christ has taken away all the sin of the world. He's taken it all upon himself. And so the temple curtain is no longer necessary. We are in God's presence now. You and I, and even all the pagans in the world, all those who don't believe in God, who would rather still live this life reveling in their sins and living for themselves, we are all in the presence of God. And we are all able to live for now as we wait for the judgment to come. It's a wonderful, wonderful realization, and it helps to paint the difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament and some of the changes that you see in the what seems to be in the theology of the church and how we live our lives and function, whether it's under the law or under the gospel, and all of that ends up fitting together so very nicely, just like the tent fits together so very nicely here in this section. So we see that in verse 33 that's going to separate the holy place from the most holy place. The mercy seat, the ark, is to be put in the most holy place, whereas in the holy place, the first room that you would enter when you come into the tabernacle, you would have the table. So these are the things created in the previous chapter, chapter 25. The table of the presence, so bread and wine, is going to be outside the veil. It's going to be in the holy place. The lampstand is on the south side, and the table is on the north side. They're opposite one another. So this tabernacle, whenever it's set up, is going to face east. It's going to face the rising of the sun. And so they set this up with then as you're picturing it, you've got the lampstand in the middle of the room on the southern edge, and the table of the presence on the northern edge. We haven't read about the incense altar yet, but that will be also made, and it will be put basically right up against the curtain, the veil, which would be on the west side at this point of this setup. They then make a screen to cover over the entrance of the tent, so something to block the holy place off from the rest of the world. And that is something that even just the priest can go through. So the priest can go into the holy place, but only the chief priest will be able to go into the most holy place. And again, we'll see more of this as we unpack the book together. Just trying to put it before you here together now today. One of the things you could do questions wise with your kids on this chapter is just reading comprehension or listening comprehension. See if they can tell you what's inside the tabernacle, and that would reflect be a good summary from yesterday and also today. That might be something worth doing. As we move forward in the days to come, we're going to see the blueprint continue as God lays out the design for some of the other parts of not just the tabernacle proper, the tent itself, but the fullness of the courtyard that is going to surround it.